So back in December, I had the opportunity to ask the government about the carbon tax. You know, this is a topic that it's not going away anytime soon. When I talk to people back home, in particular this time of year, it's April. The farmers, they're itching to get going in the fields here. They see the costs and the effects of the carbon tax right up front, because farmers back home, they're price takers. They don't get to pass costs on to anybody, at least not back home. There are other farmers in greenhouses that grow produce that they're able to pass on some of those prices, which is, that's a whole nother issue. I'm going to focus more so on the grain farmers that I have back home today. So for them, they have to pay the carbon tax on their trucking. They have to pay it. They're still waiting for the grain drying bill to pass. So there's a lot of things that they still have to pay it on. If they want to get fertilizer shipped out to their farm, they got to pay the carbon tax on that. So they have to absorb that price. They cannot pass that cost on to anybody else. So they are paying the cost for it. They also don't get to sell their crop to anybody, right? So there's a global price that is set on their crops. So they have to buy their machinery, they have to buy their crops, they have to buy their inputs, and then they grow the crops and they harvest the crops, right? So they're price takers. There are some exemptions for on-farm usage, but that does not cover the cost that is associated with many other activities. And that's part of what we're trying to get the attention on the government for. But there's another element to the carbon tax, Mr. Speaker, that the government continues to not address, and that is the issue of municipalities and of towns. You know, I gave the example previously about the town of Shaunavon, for instance. It's going to be an 8 or 9% property tax increase for them to cover the cost of the carbon tax alone. The city of Swift Current, it's a multiple percentage point increase on property taxes, again, to cover off the carbon tax. The town of Kindersley, they've got a fairly new hockey rink that was built in the last 10 years. They just recently built a brand new aquatic center. For them to run just those two facilities, they're paying $12,000 a month in carbon tax. So the costs are exorbitant, but that cost goes directly back onto the ratepayers. So the same ratepayers are paying the carbon tax on their gas, their groceries, their home heating. They also have to pay it on the increases on their property tax, as they have to pay the cost that the town of Kindersley has to pay on these buildings, and there's no rebate that covers that. So this is just yet another layer to the carbon tax that people are getting gouged on, and the government continues to refuse to do anything about that.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians have been through a lot in the past 5 years, and many are struggling with the cost of living. We have heard numerous calls to scale back the carbon pricing system in response. But carbon pricing is not the problem. It's designed to help families through the Canada Carbon Rebate, which will help lower and middle-income households most of all. That's why a pause on carbon pricing simply won't help families keep life affordable. Le gouverneur de la Banque du Canada.
The governor of the Bank of Canada has explained that carbon pricing creates only 0.15% of yearly inflation, which is a tiny fraction of the high inflation we've seen. And economists believe that carbon pricing is responsible for an increase of 0.33% in the cost of groceries. Once again, this is an infinitesimal fraction of what we've all faced over the last few months. This can be explained by the fact that farmers are already exempted from carbon pricing in most of their activities. Bill C-234 will simply not make a difference for households facing an increase in the cost of food. It would be specious to suggest that it will help. It is logical that carbon pricing does not cause inflation, a phenomenon taking place throughout the world, including in many countries that do not have a carbon pricing system.
Are events like the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 crisis and Russia's war in the Ukraine driving energy prices up. Canada's price on pollution is designed to protect Canadians from any price increases it does cause. All direct proceeds from pricing carbon pollution under the federal system are returned to the jurisdiction in which they were collected. More than 90% of fuel charge proceeds are returned directly to individuals and households through the Canada Carbon Rebate, distributed via check or direct bank deposit every 3 months. And 8 out of 10 families in provinces where the federal system applies receive more money back than they pay. Nous ne pouvons pas nier les effets dévastateurs des...
We cannot deny the devastating impacts of climate change. Doing nothing is not an option. That would only cause us to lose time in the worldwide race to find zero-carbon solutions. Climate efforts are costing Canadian households $720 a year, climate impacts rather, and that will reach $2,000 shortly. It also costs lives and affects millions of people, physical and mental health.
Our communities, our businesses. Choosing the easy path now will force us all to take a harder path later, and that is not an option.
Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, at the end of the day, just because you can't see the cost of the carbon tax on your grocery bill doesn't mean it's not driving up that cost. We know that it's driving up that cost. Anybody that's gone to the grocery store knows the price of groceries are going up and up and up. And when you tax the trucker that brings the food from the farm to the terminal, when you tax the truck that takes it from production to the grocery store, when you tax the grocery store, you're taxing the food and you're driving up the cost for the consumer that buys the food. Now, we know that through the Canada Gazette, we know that through the government's regulations, it expressly states that on carbon pricing and many other government initiatives that the people most likely to experience the dramatic effects the most are single mothers, seniors living on a fixed income. We have seen that firsthand. We have experienced that firsthand. That's why we're seeing issues with people being able to pay their mortgages, people being able to pay their bills, people being able to buy their food to feed their families.
And then the Secretary Parliamentar.
Carbon pricing is one of the simplest and most effective ways to reduce pollution since it sends a signal across the economy. It gives every household and business an incentive to find ways to reduce pollution, but leaves them the flexibility to decide when and how to take action. C'est pourquoi le prix sur la pollution.
That's why pollution pricing in itself has accomplished 1/3 of greenhouse gas reductions. 1/3 of the reductions we need in order to do our fair share. It's a central pillar of a serious climate plan. The projections made by Environment and Climate Change Canada show that emissions would have been higher by 18 metric tons without the carbon pricing system.